and that she had just set up the photograph, timed it and left it to go off, whereas the other girl said that it was fake still. It was like an early 20th century online, but not online pranks. If they were out here today, they would have filmed it. They would have been doing TikToks on this ish, okay? They're not necessarily part of our third dimensional realm. I think they are part third, part fourth dimensional, which is why they can kind of cross over. So where is the third one they're talking of? Wait, so are they saying that they only think that there are 2 fairies here? But they're clearly 3. These days we are so used to saying, it's AI, it's AI. But did you know that the original hoax, the original that is some fake bullish, happened 106 years ago, all right, in a sleepy part of England, and to this day remains one of the biggest hoaxes of the 20th century and even our century. And I'm talking about the Cottingley Fairies Hoax, all right, the Cottingley Fairies Hoax. And I did a little video the other day because on a short, because I was basically talking about the fact that me being an Axis Mundi and a mystic, I tapped in for some reason and felt drawn to wanting to do a video on that, just to open my phone and to find out that it was the day before the final photograph was ever taken, exactly 106 years ago. And I posted that video on the actual day 106 years ago, when it actually, you know, when they did the last photograph. So I was like, let me do the video, because famously there were 5 photographs taken, all right, and the 2 girls claimed they were real fairies. And obviously we know it's a hoax, but the crux being that the final photograph is disputed by the 2 girls, or women who have now died, because they said, one said it was a fake and the other said no, it was real. But let's jump into our little time machine rewind so that those that actually have no idea what I'm talking about, we can get a little bit of background info on exactly what the story is before I start presenting the images and showing you why I personally believe that there was truth to that final photograph actively having real elementals in it. I genuinely believe that there were. Jump in the time machine, guys. Let's do this. So of course, everybody, you know, we are infatuated with all things sort of like fairy, all right? No wonder it's not like a weird thing that so many people are kind of obsessed or really love the idea that fairies, the way that we see them, exist, all right? Because there's something so whimsical, there's something so magical about it, fairy dust, all of this kind of thing. There's just something so beautiful about it. Now, I don't want to shatter anybody's dreams here, okay? But the reason why I talk about elementals in my pictures and stuff like that is because I show real elementals, all right? I show them how they are, okay? And they're not how people sometimes think that they're going to look in photos, but they look different in all photos. Some of them, I'm sure, they will look completely corporeal. You can see them. Most times what people consider to be fairies are what you would usually call elementals, and what fairies actually are a little bit darker when it comes to mystical myth. All right, fairies are usually life-size and they are more connected to Celtic myth and they're called the She, the Fae, the little people, and they are darker in nature, all right? They are other, they are from the other realms, all right? That is what real, air quotes, fairies are. And somehow along the way, it got misconstrued or it got intertwined with the little winged beings that we see through Disney and through other forms of media. Now, the Victorians actually had a large part in this because they fell in love with the idea of fairies. And the Victorians loved to have lots of pictures and they had lots of like intricate drawings. They really fell in love with that. And they used to use so much fairy imagery. They're very cute little winged beings where it's all very, you know, it's very nice. All right, maybe they did that in a bid to, you know, cover up some of the darkness of what the encounters with, air quotes, the Fae were. They weren't cute, they weren't great. People should be careful, you should be worried, all right? You shouldn't enter lightly into interactions with the Fae because they may or may not be nice, okay, to you by hindsight. Okay, I'm not saying they're all evil, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they are not from this realm. Therefore, what they consider normal is not what we consider normal, all right? So maybe it's really, really funny to, you know, unalive someone or to really, really badly hurt somebody. It might be humorous there, But to us, it's not, okay? You know what? It's that sort of thing. You never know. So that's why there's so many rules. But coming back to it, the Victorians fell in love with that imagery. That's the imagery that got pushed out heavily. And that's the imagery that has stayed with us to this day when we think of fairies. Now, I'm not saying that winged beings don't exist, but what I am saying is that I think that when we are experiencing that, we are seeing elementals. And elementals are nature spirits, and they are connected with the elements, the earth, air, fire, water. A lot of the air quotes fairies that we see with the little wings and the things that we see in nature, they're usually connected to the earth. And that's why we see them in forests, okay? Gnomes are particularly connected to gardens and the earth, and with plants. You know, there's a difference between divas and sort of like the little fairy type beings. I'm not saying I'm an expert on this, but I'm just giving, you know, a little bit of background as to what that is, all right? And we do, and then you do have it does start to venture off into other cultures of different types of fairies, all right? So you've got gnomes, some people call them duendes. There's so many, but what I'm saying is I think these are a part, they're not necessarily part of our third dimensional realm. I think they are part third, part fourth dimensional, which is why they can kind of cross over, but they are more connected to the elemental realm than the fae and the she. Those are completely different things. So let's take the time machine back, all right? And I'm going to read what it says on Google, because why not? So let's go all the way back to 1917. There were two young girls, okay? There was Elsie Wright, and she was 16, and then we had Frances Griffiths, who was 9, and they grew up and they lived near Bradford, which is in the north of England, in a small area called Cottingley, all right, hence the name Cottingley Fairies. Okay, they were cousins, and they used to spend a lot of their time just, I guess, playing and just, you know, in there and having vivid imaginations. They were said to have vivid imaginations, and they just loved to play, all right. The older cousin Elsie was a really good artist. In fact, she is a good artist, and she came up with the idea that she would draw these fairy beings, all right, on paper and paint them and everything like that, cut them out. They will take photographs of them with them. Basically, we're doing the equivalent of what everybody does nowadays when we grab our phones. They were pranking. They wanted to prank their parents and their family by saying, see, fairies are real. So it was all part of it was like an early 20th century online, but not online pranks. If they were out here today, they would have filmed it. They would have been doing TikToks on this ish, okay? But that's what they did. So
now, why would they be wanting to prank the family in the first place, you might add? Why would they want to make the family believe that they were seeing fairies in the first place? It's pretty random, right? Well, the reason why it was fairies is that little Frances Griffith, the 9-year-old, had already been telling people like her family that she had seen fairies around Cottingley Beck. So she had seen fairies already as she was, you know, out and about on her own, maybe playing, etc. She had said specifically that she had already seen a little 18-inch little man who was carrying and twirling a willow leaf. So she was telling people these stories in her family, and of course nobody believed her. They thought it was all fabrication of a young little girl's mind, and it was that prompted them to, I guess, decide to prank the family with fairies and be like, well, they're actually real, etc, etc. So this actually makes the story really interesting, because it isn't just a straight cut, well, we invented fake fairies because, you know, we just wanted to get attention or anything like that. Particularly on Frances's behalf, it was more, well, we faked these photos, but it was based on something that I genuinely believed I had been seeing. And that is something that I personally can relate to. I can relate to that, which gives it a different flavour. And I think that got lost along the way in time.
Their father had what is called this really interesting camera. They must have had some money to get that camera. But they took their father's camera. Elsie, I said, she traced fairy illustrations from the children's books. She cut them out and she propped them up with hairpins.
Is, as I said, that they traced the images from a book. Now, this particular book that they had, it was actually Princess Mary's gift book in order to raise money for things related to women. All right, I can't remember exactly what. So it was from that particular book that she traced the outlines of these little fairies, and she actually then, you know, drew them onto cardboard and added her own bits. So if you look here, you can actually see the actual illustrations from the Queen Mary's book, and you can see exactly, very, very clearly, that these are the bases for the cutouts. It's very clear here.
And they posed these photographs. Now, where it all went tits up for them is when they took these photographs, even though it was prank, hee hee ha ha, they did somehow, and I don't remember how, but they did somehow get a little bit of circulation. People did talk about them. It must have just been word of mouth. And the worst thing, or maybe the best thing, depending on how you look at it, could have happened. And that was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle caught wind that these photographs existed. Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, for those that don't know, is the infamous, famous writer, the author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. Very esteemed, very well known, even in death. He was that person. And he became interested in it. And that's where shit went left, because he blew them up. He sent them viral. He basically made them go viral. Okay, and as viral as you can in 1917 England, all right, in not even England, in the world. He made them go viral. You can imagine just how big this would have been for this story to become world famous. You can imagine just how much drama was around it. Victorians, they were incredibly obsessed with the macabre and with seances and with the afterlife. Therefore, there was a lot of interest in mysticism. You had Theosophy was on and popping at the time with Madame Blavatsky. You had bloody Aleister Crowley. This was the time, period. So there was just a lot of interest in anything that was quite mystical and mysticism, all right. Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was really into seances and stuff like that. He had lost one of his children to World War One. So he was in a state of grief. And so I'm imagining that the idea of fairies existing, something so beautiful, so whimsical, really took his attention. And he really championed them by saying that these images were real. This is what kept, I imagine, the lie alive for longer, because they must have felt trapped in this lie. They really didn't. They felt like they probably couldn't tell the truth at this point, and it just became a runaway train, all right, because of the notoriety. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believed in this so much, all right, that he really pushed it. There were many people that didn't believe in it, but he just pushed harder that these were real, okay? It says here, interest in the Cottingley Fairies gradually declined after 1921, and both the girls married and lived abroad for a time after they grew up, yet the photos over the decades still continue to take attention. I remember when I first heard of them as well. Now, in 1966, a reporter from the Daily Express traced Elsie, the oldest one, who had by then returned to the United Kingdom, and the media once again became interested in the story. Now, it hit the early 1980s, and maybe these women who are now at this point, hitting their 80s, etc., they were probably I can't take this to the grave, and they confessed that it was all a hoax and that it was a lie. But the split came because, again, I said right up until the end, Frances claimed that the final image that was taken was real, and that she had just set up the photograph, timed it, and left it to go off, whereas
Elsie claimed that she took the photograph, but that it was all fake, which makes us wonder, how did that happen? How did you take the photograph, but it's all a hoax? Well, both girls were on the same page by both admitting that yes, the first 4 photographs were indeed fake, all right, but on Frances' behalf, she believed in fairies and emphatically, said that she did throughout her life. The 5th photograph, this is the one that caused the controversy, and this is the one that I'm showing you, where I believe when I'm looking at this image there are real elementals, even though this photograph has been disputed like the others as being a hoax, etc. Now, this photo is different because unlike the others, the girls are not in it, and there is a slight different quality to the image. Now, I was getting confused as I was reading accounts because it was saying that they both fell out over the final photograph, because I was reading, I had to dig a little bit deeper to actually kind of untangle the wires of the story. Now, I was getting confused because I was well, if Elsie is saying that no, all of them were faked, but Frances is saying the first 4 were faked, but this final one is real, that's kind of like a headfuck, because it's just getting very confused over the timelines. Elsie rejected the 5th photograph as another fabrication, whereas Frances insisted that no cutouts had been prepared on the day that that photograph was taken, and maintains that what she photographed was genuine.
What's funny though is that these pictures were actually, back then, some people actually assessed them and they actually deemed them to be real, which is crazy because they clearly look fake by our standards. You can see they're very two-dimensional, these images that they did, even though they're quite good for like considering it's 1917. There's a very much two-dimensional quality to it. However, like I said again, the cousins disagreed about the fifth and final photograph. So there were 5 photographs in all, and I'll put them up here, all right? But the final photograph, the cousins disagreed because
Frances is claiming that she took the photograph, but then Elsie is also claiming that she took the photograph.
Apparently considering whether it is time to get up. An early riser of more mature age is seen on the right, possessing abundant hair and wonderful wings. Her slightly denser body can be glimpsed within her fairy dress. So where is the third one they're talking of? Wait, so are they saying that they only think that there are 2 fairies here? But they're clearly 3. Huh. That's strange. But what about the one in the middle, y'all? How interesting. Why aren't they saying that's fake?
Now, I had to pause and do a little bit of a deep dive because I got really confused about the fact that, hang on a minute, why are they only saying that there are 2? Are they saying that there are only 2, right? So you're hearing Rosie from Editing Future here, all right? But this is interesting now because this takes it even deeper, because this part of this information here isn't information that is like readily available. Like I had to kind of like really like specifically look for this. So the bit that I just read stands, but there actually is more to this, all right? The guy that was with Arthur Conan Doyle that was going around, like, seeing what the girls were doing, etc., was named Edward Gardner. And he wrote a book called The Coming of the Fairies, all right, which was reproduced by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, all right? And that's where they were like describing the fairy on the far left and the fairy on the far right, all right? So the fairy on the upper left ledge and then the mature fairy on the right. But there's more. More art usually stops there. Now, a gardener goes on to continues and identifies a clear-cut head of an elf further to the right, which is exactly what I think that I'm talking about with the pixie. Right, with the bob, with the 1920s bob. But it also goes on to describe a demure-looking sprite on the extreme left and another winged figure above that, all right, apparently coming down onto the grass. I would like to know exactly which demure-looking sprite on the extreme left he's talking about, because there are some on the extreme left. Now, this actually slightly backs up what I'm saying, because I've never seen this before, but I was saying that there is more going on the left photograph, and there is a being that is above. All right, that is kind of a bit clear, even though there's way more than that, but these are the ones that stand out the most. This gardener identified at least 5 beings altogether that he said that he saw. I'm seeing way more than 5, but this is fascinating because this bit isn't exactly like front and center in the public mindset. That being said, the central figure that I'm like, why are they not seeing that? Maybe this is why Gardner actually didn't interpret that as a fae or a fairy. He said that was the central ethereal cocoon of like the nest, whatever he was looking at. That's why it was called a bower or a cradle, like a cocoon or like an open chirylisis, and Arthur Conan Doyle called it like a sheath or a cocoon. Some kind of magnetic bath that fairies used. I have no freaking idea what the hell a magnetic bath is. Like, what's wrong with a regular bath? Like, bruh, water is fine. However, to me, I'm like, no, I don't believe that's a sheath. I don't believe that's a cocoon. I believe that is a very clear woman, and you've heard me describe why, or you will hear me describe why. I'll slot this in wherever I can slot this in, but that's that.
So now the interesting thing is Elsie saying that she had nothing prepared for that final photograph, and that it was a wet Saturday afternoon and they were just mooching about with the camera, and she had nothing prepared, and she saw these fairies building up in the grass and aimed the camera and took a photograph. It said that it was suggesting that the 5th photograph was an unintended double exposure of the fairy cutouts in the grass. Thus both ladies can be quite sincere in believing that they each took it. That's one way that they put it. But that's quite interesting, because when I saw this final photograph, this is why I'm doing this, I was ready to be like, well, it's bollocks, okay. But when I looked at it, I'm like, no, there are beings in this photograph, but they weren't the ones that they're saying. So they're saying that these two that I will highlight are
the ones that they speak about in Gardner's book as being fairies. But these are also the ones that people are saying might be fakes. All right, they could be fakes, whether it's hat pins and cutouts or double exposure plates. But what surprises me is that they're not making any mention of the one in the middle. But then, after digging a little bit more when I was reading, I saw that they did make mention of it. It's just that they didn't attribute that to being a being. Gardner and Arthur Conan Doyle said that it was a cocoon, a cheirilysis of sorts, some kind of magnetic bath, whatever the hell that is when it's at home. That's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a female, which is really throwing off everything that I thought about some of these images when I first started to make this video, which is very interesting and goes to show that everything is fluid and static, and you really can't stick to one path or let your ego take you away with you when you see that maybe what you saw was a little bit different. Because now I'm reassessing with this new information, and to be honest, it still is the same outcome that I'm having. I personally do not believe that these are all double exposures. Absolutely no way. No way, no way, no way, no way. But I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What do you think?
About the one in the middle, I just assumed because it's so in your face-ish, it's a bit more see-through, but I just assumed because it looks quite similar. So that is very interesting. The one on the left, it's like, I don't know what it is, but I was really ready to say it's 100% fake. I've seen it before and thought it was, but the more I look at it...
Something that stood out to me as well is that if you look very closely, you can see that there's an actual pointy ear. And this is something that you don't really see. That little detail stood out to me, and it's not something that you see elsewhere. It's not in the original illustrations, and it's not really in any of the stuff that they're doing. Not to say that they didn't have pointy-eared beings at that time, but it just stands out. There's something about that being that the more I'm looking, the more I'm actually leaning towards the fact that that potentially could be real, which is wild to me because I never thought that would be the case. Maybe it superimposed a real being over a bit of the fake one, but that little ear and even the little pixie haircut, I feel like I see a little thing there. But all over the image, and I'm going to show more, as I'm talking, you'll be seeing the images scrolling by here of what I'm seeing in this photograph, a very active photograph. But this story, actually, there's more to it than meets the eye, and it's perfect for this channel.
I can't say with my chest that that's 100% fake. There's something about it, but the one on the right, 100%, you can see that flat two-dimensional effect that they've got going on there.
Quite surprised, because when I first came across this image years ago, I immediately was like, okay, there are three beings in this picture. They must be the three faked hoax beings, because like you can clearly see three. All right. Then I found out that the Elsie and Lily are saying they're torn. One of them thinks it's real, the other one says it's real, the other one says it doesn't. But when I was looking at the images, I immediately saw three, so I immediately thought that three of them were deemed, they were hoaxes, just like the others. They were cut out and pinned. All right, you can very clearly see three winged beings with diaphanous kind of like clothing, where you can sort of, diaphanous meaning like a veil, like you can sort of see through it. You can very much see that. Right, now the one in the center, although it is a little bit more see-through, it's not, as you can see, the one on the right looks way more flat and two-dimensional. There is kind of a little bit, to be honest, the arm and the back you can see actually has kind of 3D form, like it doesn't look quite flat. But it's surprising me, this is what I mean, that people can look at this image and miss that completely, even if they didn't think that it was one of them. It looks very clear, you can see the little wing, all kinds of things. So then we go to the one on the left, which I said I'm not 100% sure, but there is something about it that captivates me, but it still does have that flat two-dimensional, you know, look to it, like the other pictures and like the one on the far right. So it's boggling my mind that they only were talking about two beings being in this actual photograph, when I'm like, what about the one that is straight there in your face, slap bang in the middle? Like, what are we talking about? There's a whole face on it. There's a whole outfit. There's a whole arm, right? But now the more I look at this, the one in the middle, the more I am really seeing that the arm actually has form. It looks like a little bit third dimensional. When if you look at the arm of the one on the right, there's this flat quality to it. So I'm just like, wow, it's quite interesting. And see, this goes to show that sometimes if you're not paying attention, certain things you can skip. Because I can see three things, I assumed they were all interesting. Although I will go on to say the other beings that were showing up in the pictures that I can very clearly see, I can see are not fake. All right, but I just had to put that bit in there because, you know, we're all human and sometimes we can miss things. But I'm shocked. So you tell me, guys, what do you think? Do you see the one in the middle or not? What do you think about it all?
There's actually quite a lot of beings in this picture, but for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to be able to show you the ones that I think are legible enough for people to see. I'm not going to spend time trying to point out things that people really won't be able to see, but there are a few really good ones that you can see, and the first ones are the ones to the right of the image. Look at these two ladies there. One has a bob hairstyle. It's almost very 1920s, which does kind of cause you to sort of raise your eyebrows when you really think about it, because it is kind of in line with the fashion at the time. But at the same time, but can you clearly see that? And there is a face next to it doing this. Now, if you look, there is a completely different feel to the faces to that face, to those two faces particularly, and to these cardboard cutouts. There is form. It feels like there is dimension to the features. This is not a flat image. This is not a two-dimensional image in any way, shape or form. There is something there. Those are real. Those are real. I can clearly see it. It's so clear. Those are real elementals, and they're actually pretty stunning, to be honest, because it's so clear. It's so clear, you know, like usually with certain elementals, sometimes it can be a case of it doesn't look completely human sometimes. But here you can clearly see these are like little people. I have pictures I did in my first video where you can really see a couple that are very clear. It's not always like that. This, 1,000,000%. Look at these faces. So we've got this dark bob. You can see the girl is smiling, sitting there, and the other one, that other one with the face to the side is the one that is like, yes, okay, because it looks very other. It looks real, but very other. Like, why would there be a face that small? Remember where this is, a little bit on the grass. It's a fully formed little woman's face. That is not fake. That is not a Dick's Bubble Exploder. It's not fake at all. Now, if we go up to the top, you can see that there is like a blonde head. You can just see half of the face. And I try to put my little images here that I try to draw very badly around them. But listen, I'm not here to be an artist. I'm just here to draw your eye to what I'm seeing. But you can see that that's another male there. And in fact, there's actually quite a few around her, to be honest. You can see the areas where I've circled, very clear to me anyway. And then if we go to the other side, you can see these images. All right. This is where it gets tricky, and that's why it looks like they're all like doing this, because like I said, particularly for elementals, they don't operate in the same way that we do. If we were to have a photograph taken of us, we have to be standing very separate from each other so that we don't cross in front and therefore, part of us gets cut out of a photograph. They don't operate like that. I've seen where you can get like 10 of them come in the same area, and it just is a real mind F and an optical illusion, because it's like faces are all merged and blended together. So you can have one face there, but it can almost be another face is there and it looks like it's sharing an eye or another part. It literally is like that. So that's when it gets hard to isolate. It's because that they're not from the third dimension and the laws of physics aren't the same. All right, but literally, that is what that's what's going on in this picture. And you can decide. But all I know is that I believe that the famous or the infamous fifth fairy photograph from the Cottingley Fairies, I do believe that it is half real. I don't know, but I feel like there are real elementals in there as well. So it's very confusing as to the story still is confusing, even though one girl says that it's fake, the other says it's real. It's still confusing because it still leaves, there's still unanswered questions. But personally, in my opinion, looking at this image, there most definitely are real elemental fairies in this picture, 100%. And there are other people that have picked up on this, but because this is such a widely hoaxed story, I can't imagine that it's actually going to go far, people believing that now there are real elementals in it. But I can tell you, from somebody that sees these things, I can only tell you what I see, and I'm like, yeah, there are real elementals in this image, particularly females, and it's amazing. I think this is actually an actual photograph that's captured real elemental air quotes fairies, like genuinely, and it's a shame because half the world thinks it's fake.
To be honest, Frances actually felt like this whole Cottingley fairy thing ruined her life. She really wanted to stay far away from it, and in fact, in her memoir, she speaks about the fact that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle really was obsessed with the photos. She criticised him, saying like he was so easy to fool, but also he's just obsessed with the photos and not on the experience behind the photos. The experience being, Frances kept on saying that, dude, I'm seeing real fairies. I've been seeing real fairies down by the creek, but nobody wanted to hear about that. And that makes it completely apt for my channel. And in fact, this extra information makes this case a little bit more relatable to my life experience, because this wasn't just a hoax for the sake of being a hoax. One of the girls actually believed that she was seeing elementals and fairies. I kind of believe her in a way. You know, I do believe her. I mean, who am I to say no? But what happened afterwards, you know, wasn't great. And the fact that she shied away from media attention for the rest of her life and really believed that it ruined her life, and she felt betrayed by the journalist who she admitted that it was a fake to, and who then promptly ran the story before telling her and outed them, even though it was going to be happening soon anyway. That was the betrayal that was felt, not so much because Elsie was saying that it was fake. It was the betrayal towards the journalist. So this story actually has ended up in a way that I didn't expect. At the beginning, I was just thinking about it as the famous Cottingley hoax, which it was. But as we look more into it, we can see this actually is a story about somebody who perhaps had the fairy sight, second sight, who was in tune with the elemental world and could see, and another one who perhaps couldn't, and what culminated from that, which makes it way more interesting to me, you know. So what do we think here? Is that final fifth photo a double exposure? Is it just nothing? Or are there real beings in it? What do you think? I know what I think.
So, considering that it was drawn to my attention, I feel like I said in my other video that I think that I was made to bring this video to awareness, because I think that the elemental kingdom wants people to know that they are there. These are the times where these things are coming out now, as we're expanding in consciousness, and being an Axis Mundi and a walker between the worlds, I do see into the other realms. Whether I want to or not, it's just a sight that I have, and I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do here. I'm supposed to bring this information out. I'm not the first person, but to say like, yeah, we exist, we do exist, you know. And they really showed themselves here. I guarantee, especially those two girls, the ones on the end, those are real. Those are real elementals. I love it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I'm so glad I made it through this video, y'all, because like, I'm knackered. I wasn't well yesterday, and I spent the day just lying on the sofa, barely moving, because I really wasn't feeling well. So the fact that I managed to crack this out, I'm proud of myself. So until next time, take care of yourself, guys. Bye.